Imagine you were handed a briefcase full of money by the most powerful person you've ever met. Not your money, their money. And they looked you dead in the eye and said, "I'm trusting you with this." Then they walked away. Now here's the question that nobody asks. The question that actually determines everything. What does that person do next? Do they invest it? Do they protect it? Do they panic? Because depending on what they do, that one decision either opens a door to more responsibility than they've ever known, or it gets them cast out entirely. This isn't a motivational story I made up. This is a parable Jesus told 3 days before his arrest. And almost nobody teaches it the way Jesus actually meant it. Today, we're going to fix that. Let me be honest with you up front. I'm not here to tell you that Jesus wants you to invest in index funds. I'm also not here to tell you that money is evil and that faithful Christians should keep it under the mattress. What I am here to do is sit with you inside one of the most strategically misread passages in the entire New Testament and let the text speak for itself. Because here's the problem. When most churches preach the parable of the talents, they do one of two things. They either turn it into a feel-good sermon about using your gifts like your singing voice, your ability to organize church events, your personality traits. Or they use it as a guilt trip. Work harder. Do more. Maximize your potential for God. And while neither of those interpretations is completely worthless, they both miss the actual subject matter of the parable. Jesus is literally talking about money, about investment, about risk, and about what it means to be faithful with material resources in a world where the future is uncertain. The Greek word used in this parable, talanton, referred to a unit of weight used to measure precious metals. This was currency. This was wealth. This was real financial capital changing hands. So today, let's treat it that way. Let's read it like it means what it says. And I promise you, by the end of this, you will never look at this parable the same way again. Here's something the Sunday school version almost never mentions. Context. Jesus doesn't tell this parable on a calm Tuesday afternoon to a crowd of curious onlookers. He tells it on the Mount of Olives, just outside Jerusalem, while sitting with his closest disciples in what theologians call the Olivet Discourse. This is Jesus in final mode. He knows what's coming: the trial, the cross, the silence before the resurrection. And knowing all of that, he sits down and tells his disciples 3 parables back to back, all of them orbiting the same theme. What are you doing while I'm gone? The first parable is about 10 virgins waiting for a bridegroom. It's about preparedness. The third parable is about separating the sheep from the goats. It's about compassion and action. And the one in the middle, sandwiched between those two, is about money and stewardship. Not metaphorical money, not spiritual gifts wrapped up in symbolic language. Literal financial resource management. Think about that positioning for a second. Jesus, in his final teaching session before his death, chooses to dedicate a third of his urgent, last-minute instruction to the question of what you do with what you've been given. I think we've domesticated this parable because the real version is uncomfortable. It implicates people who consider themselves safe, responsible, and risk-averse. It suggests that the most spiritually dangerous posture isn't recklessness. It's fear dressed up as caution. And that's not a message most pulpits are eager to deliver. Comment below. Have you ever heard this parable preached as a lesson about actual money? I'm genuinely curious. Let's walk through the parable carefully, because the details are where the meaning lives. A wealthy landowner is preparing for a long journey, the kind in the ancient world could mean months or even years away. Before he leaves, he summons 3 of his servants, and he distributes to each of them a significant portion of his wealth. Now, 1 talent in the first century context was roughly equivalent to 15 to 20 years of an average worker's wages. Let that land. The servant who received 1 talent, who we often feel sorry for, received the equivalent of an entire generation's worth of income in a single handoff. This is not a story about small things. This is a story about enormous trust. To the first servant, 5 talents that he owed the second, 2 talents that he owed the third, 1. And the text says something that most people read right past. Each according to his own ability. This is not random. This is not favoritism. This is precision. The master knows these three men. He's observed them. He's assessed their capacity, and he distributes accordingly, not equally, but appropriately. Did you know that the concept of giving according to ability appears multiple times in Scripture? The early church in Acts operated on a similar principle. Contribution was proportional to capacity, not uniform across all members. This wasn't socialism or elitism. It was a recognition that trust scales with demonstrated faithfulness. Now, the master leaves. And here's where character is revealed. Because character is always revealed in the absence of oversight. The first servant doesn't hesitate. Matthew uses a fascinating phrase. He went at once. Immediately. No deliberation. No paralysis. He went into the marketplace, engaged with the economic world around him, took on real risk, and doubled what he had. The second servant does the same. 2 talents become 4. But here's what I want you to sit with. The ancient marketplace was not safe. Trade caravans got hijacked. Ships carrying goods disappeared into Mediterranean storms. Business partners defaulted. Crops failed. Entire fortunes evaporated overnight. When these 2 servants walked into that environment with their master's money, they were accepting the real possibility of catastrophic loss. Jesus doesn't gloss over this. He tells a story where the righteous characters are people who willingly stepped into uncertain territory, where failure was genuinely possible. Because faithfulness sometimes requires that kind of courage. But wait, because the third servant, his speech when the master returns, is about to reveal something that almost no sermon addresses directly. Stay with me. The third servant walks forward. He's carrying the same bag he received, now dirty, slightly damp from being underground. And he opens his mouth and says something that is, honestly, one of the most psychologically revealing speeches in all of Scripture. Here it is. Master, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow and gathering where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what is yours. Read that again. Notice what he doesn't say. He doesn't say, I was too busy. He doesn't say, the market was terrible. He doesn't say, I tried and failed. He says, I was afraid. That is a confession. That is self-indictment. That is this servant, with his own words, telling us exactly what drove his decision. Not wisdom, not caution, not godly prudence. Fear. And this is the part that should stop every risk-averse. Play it safe. Never lose Christian in their tracks. The master doesn't rebuke this servant for being too aggressive. He doesn't rebuke him for investing poorly. He rebukes him for not trying. The word the master uses, often translated as wicked or worthless, in Greek carries a connotation of someone who is actively harmful through inaction. In the ancient moral framework, failing to act when action was required wasn't neutral. It was a moral failure. I think the Western Church has accidentally taught a generation of Christians that safety is next to godliness. We celebrate people who don't take financial risks. We quietly look down on people who invest aggressively and lose. But this parable, straight from Jesus' mouth, suggests that the theological category for I was too scared to try is not wisdom. It might be sin. That's a hard sentence. But I think Jesus meant it to be. Comment below. Are you more naturally a risk taker or a risk avoider when it comes to money? I want to know. No judgment, just honest conversation. Now here is the moment in this parable where Jesus says something that centuries of church history have quietly tiptoed around. After rebuking the third servant for burying the talent, the master says this, "You should have at least deposited my money with the bankers so that when I returned, I could have received it with interest." Let that breathe. Jesus, in a parable about faithfulness and stewardship, explicitly recommends an interest-bearing account as the floor-level expectation, the bare minimum. Did you know that for much of church history, from roughly the 3rd century through the medieval period, Christians fiercely debated whether charging or earning interest was sinful? It was called usury, and at various points, the Catholic Church formally condemned it. And yet here, in one of Jesus' own parables, the benchmark for minimum faithfulness is, at least you could have earned interest. Now, I'm not suggesting Jesus was endorsing every financial instrument ever invented. And I'm certainly not suggesting this parable is a prosperity gospel, get-rich-quick endorsement. But what I'm saying is this: the idea that leaving your money completely idle is the safe Christian option has no scriptural foundation whatsoever. The minimum acceptable threshold, according to this text, is growth. Not guaranteed, spectacular, double your money growth, but at minimum, engagement. At minimum, putting what you've been given somewhere where it can work. The sin the master condemns is not failed investment. The sin is zero engagement. Now, I want to take you somewhere most people never connect to this parable. Open Ecclesiastes, chapter 11. This is Solomon writing, likely near the end of his life, after accumulating the kind of wealth and wisdom most humans will never experience. He writes, "Cast your bread upon the waters, for you will find it after many days. Divide your portion among 7, or even 8, for you do not know what misfortune may occur on the earth." Now, in ancient agrarian culture, casting bread upon the waters was a metaphor for maritime trade investment. You're sending goods out on ships, trusting the ocean, not knowing whether your cargo will arrive or sink. And Solomon's counsel is not, don't do it, too risky. His counsel is, do it, but spread it across 7 or 8 ventures. This is portfolio diversification, written approximately 3,000 years before the first modern hedge fund. The reason? Solomon says it plainly. You do not know what misfortune may occur. He's not teaching his readers to be reckless. He's not teaching them to hoard either. He's teaching them that faithful engagement with financial uncertainty requires spreading your exposure, because no one can predict which ventures will flourish and which will collapse. I find it genuinely remarkable that the foundational insight of modern portfolio theory, that diversification manages risk without eliminating engagement, was sitting in the book of Ecclesiastes all along. Solomon didn't have Bloomberg terminals or Monte Carlo simulations. He had observation, wisdom, and a deep theological conviction that the future belongs to God, which meant humans needed to act humbly and spread their bets accordingly. So let's pull everything together, because the 4 principles we're about to look at might be the most practically important minutes of this entire video. Principle 1. You are a manager, not an owner. Every resource you have, your income, your savings, your investments, Scripture frames these as entrusted to you, not possessed by you. The theological term is stewardship. You are managing assets that ultimately belong to God. This isn't just a spiritual platitude. It completely reframes how you make decisions. An owner can do whatever they want with their stuff. A steward is accountable for how they handle someone else's. Principle 2. Engagement is expected, not optional. Both the parable and Ecclesiastes converge on the same point. Growth is the baseline expectation, not guaranteed results, not zero risk, but genuine, thoughtful engagement with the resources you've been given. Parking everything in perfect safety and calling it wisdom is not a biblical category. It is, if we're reading Jesus carefully, closer to the opposite. Principle 3. Spread your risk, don't concentrate it. Solomon's 7 or 8 isn't an arbitrary number. It's a principle. Don't put everything on a single outcome. Whether you're thinking about financial investments, a business, a career path, the wise person doesn't bet everything on one variable. Not because they lack faith, but because they acknowledge that God alone knows the future, and wisdom operates in that humility. Principle 4. Fear is a spiritual problem, not a financial strategy. This is the one almost nobody talks about. The third servant's failure was not mathematical. It was not strategic. It was emotional. It was fear. And Jesus identifies that fear as the root cause of a moral failure. Which means, if your financial paralysis, your avoidance of investment, your refusal to engage is driven primarily by anxiety rather than wisdom, that's not something a better spreadsheet will fix. That's something that requires looking honestly at what you actually believe about God's sovereignty, provision, and trustworthiness. Which of these 4 principles hits you hardest personally? Drop in the comments 1, 2, 3, or 4. I genuinely read, every comment. Here's where I want to leave you. The third servant didn't lose his talent in a bad investment. He didn't squander it on foolish spending. He didn't even make a series of mistakes that led to its erosion. He just stopped. He let fear make his decision for him. And then he dressed that fear up in theological language. I knew you were a hard master, as if caution was the same thing as faithfulness. It wasn't. And here's the quietly devastating conclusion to his story. Even what he had was taken from him. The person who refused to risk anything ended up with nothing. That is not a metaphor Jesus is using lightly. The path of the faithful steward is not a path without uncertainty. It's a path through uncertainty, with eyes open, hands engaged, and a posture that says, this isn't mine, but I'm going to be the kind of person who can be trusted with more. And that, more than any investment strategy, more than any portfolio breakdown, more than any financial framework, is the heart of what Jesus was teaching. Not wealth, trustworthiness, not prosperity, faithfulness, not the absence of risk, the courage to engage anyway. If this video made you think differently about this passage, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Not someone who needs financial advice, someone who needs permission to stop being paralyzed by fear. And if you want to go deeper into what Scripture actually says about money, work, and provision, subscribe, because that's exactly what we're doing here, one video at a time. I'll see you in the next one.